See, one of the biggest complaints that people have about Boruto, and somewhat justifiably, is that the new Gen Team 7 just doesn't really measure up to the old Gen Team 7. I mean, in Naruto, we had in Team 7 at least 3 incredibly compelling characters. And while Sakura does eventually find her way to become one of the more interesting characters in the entirety of the Naruto universe, for the majority of the time, Kakashi, Naruto, and Sasuke carried the team. In Naruto, we had an up-and-coming ruffian, somebody that everybody hated but would eventually grow to love. In Kakashi, we had a childhood genius who lost everybody he ever loved but never let the world see his pain. And in Sasuke, we had kind of the same thing as Kakashi, but he let the whole world see his pain. And these dynamics only became more interesting when Sasuke finally abandoned the village, putting Sasuke and Naruto at odds and Kakashi awkwardly somewhere in the middle. And thus, when somebody asks you who's your favorite character from Naruto, there is a higher than 50% chance I'd reckon that you would say either Naruto, Sasuke, or Kakashi. However, for some reason or another, it doesn't feel as though our new Gen Team 7, that is Boruto's Team 7, lives up to that similar level of hype. Sarada, while an interesting character who was the second youngest person ever to awaken a Mangekyo Sharingan, doesn't get nearly as much screen time as she deserves. And while Mitsuki, a clone of Orochimaru made in a lab with no real personality of his own, sometimes gets boiled down to just being a simp for Boruto. And don't even get me started on Konohamaru. However, while I couldn't fault you for saying that the new Gen Team 7 didn't exactly match up to old Gen Team 7 in part 1 of their respective series, you'd be blind if you didn't realize that the new Gen Team 7 is building up hype and fast. See, because while admittedly, yes, Sarada and Mitsuki, and especially Konohamaru, didn't get nearly enough screen time in part 1 of Boruto, this really came about in its truest form after the introduction of Kawaki, as the introduction of Kawaki basically sidelined characters like Sarada and Mitsuki until Kawaki could be built out as a character that could eventually serve as an antagonist in part 2 of Boruto. But the groundwork has now been done for Kawaki to serve as an antagonist, which means the door is now once again open to the rest of Team 7, and they have already very clearly began to walk through that door. See, outside of Boruto, I would argue that Two Blue Vortex is focused on Mitsuki more than any other character, as Mitsuki knocked out Kawaki when he realized Boruto was in the village, chased him down himself, had a long conversation about the sun theory, and is now very clearly shown to be shooken to his core in his belief that Kawaki is his son, to the point where Mitsuki is actually wondering if he needs a son in the first place. On top of this, Sarada has now been strategically placed opposite of Hidari, one of the key antagonists of this arc, which all revolves around the fact that Boruto allowed Sasuke to be bitten by a claw grind. And well, Konohamaru hasn't accomplished a whole lot. The Moegi Shinju has identified him as the person that she would like to consume, so we probably will get more screen time from him soon. However, the important people to focus on in this equation, and the people I believe Kishimoto is going to be focusing on in this equation, are Mitsuki, Sarada, and Boruto, which is why I believe that as soon as Chapter 12, the next chapter of Two Blue Vortex, which comes out in just a few days, we will see this legendary trio get back together. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. I believe that Team 7 is going to reunite. And I believe it's going to happen much sooner than any of us are willing to admit. But how is it going to happen? Why is it going to happen? Where is it going to happen? Well, guys, today we're going to answer all those questions and more. But first, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you want to hear me break down theories from your other favorite anime and manga, go ahead and follow my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime and manga. And if you want to see me bring real-life challenges to the anime world, go ahead and follow my brand new page that I'm making with Chris Barnett, Stephen He, and Danny Mata called Anime IRL. Or if you just want to hear me talk about anime and manga, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Before we get into all that, let's talk about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Raycon. Listen, you probably heard me or somebody else say that Raycon offers you the same audio quality as all the competitors at half the price, and thought, there's no way that's possible, as Raycon has already sold over 3 million pairs of everyday earbuds, so you know they're a fan favorite. But Raycon also wants to make sure that they remain the fan favorite, as they should be, which is why they offer a 30-day happiness guarantee. So if for some reason you don't love the audio quality or the incredible price, you can return your pair of Raycons in 30 days, hassle-free. So I gotta ask you, What are you waiting for? There's literally no threat in checking these things out. They have a 32-hour battery life, a quick charge function that yields 90 minutes of listening time and just 10 minutes of charging time, and an ergonomic design that fits in the widest range of ears with a super cozy gel tip. And that last bit is key for me because I get real sweaty when I work out, and these fit in my ears better than any earbuds I've ever used before. With other earbuds, the second my ears get sweaty, they fall out, but with these, I could be at a rock concert headbanging and I wouldn't feel a budge. So when I'm in the gym blasting Otaku's Anonymous, my everyday earbuds are a must. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in my description or go to buyraycon.com/nchammer23 to get 15% off your Raycon purchase plus free shipping. Time to start getting some value for your money. So Chapter 12 is right around the corner, and I personally cannot wait. While Chapter 11 was incredibly hype, I mean, obviously watching Himawari awaken to her Shinju Kurama mode was one of the cooler things we've seen in the Naruto universe, basically. I believe that Chapter 12 is actually going to bring more important updates in terms of world building. But how? What could be more important than Himawari awakening to be the greatest Jinchuriki of Kurama ever? Well, the possible reunion of Team 7. See, in order to anticipate what's going to happen in Chapter 12, we quickly have to go over how Chapter 11 ended. See, for those of you who don't remember, I mean, it has almost been a month now. Chapter 11 ended with Juro reigning victorious over Himawari. However, before Juro was able to go through with the consumption of Himawari, just as he wanted to, Boruto swung in and saved her. However, that wasn't the only person that Boruto was aiming to save in Chapter 11, as almost immediately after Boruto saves Himawari, he uses Flying Raijin to teleport himself to the location of Sarada and Hidari. And now, as it currently stands, Boruto is faced face to face with Hidari, and Sarada, much like Himawari, is rendered defenseless. And thus, as it currently stands, both Himawari and Sarada are not in a position to fight back against the likes of Juro and Hidari, and Boruto is basically the last line of defense, which has led some people to believe that Chapter 12 is where Boruto finally defeats Hidari and gets Sasuke back. But that's not how it's gonna go down. See, because, well, yes, technically, Boruto could place Himawari down and have a couple of uninterrupted minutes before Juro was able to get back to the location to battle against Hidari. It's too soon for that to happen. Hidari's had no character development, they really haven't even developed the powers of the Shinju, and there's a lot of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex left. And thus this battle either has to end in a stalemate or a withdrawal. Now, that withdrawal could arguably come from either side. Either Boruto could also scoop up Sarada and use Flying Raijin with I don't know, one of his hands to take him, Himawari, and Sarada to some undisclosed location where Hidari and Juro wouldn't be able to find them, or Hidari/Juro themselves could be the people to retreat. But why would Hidari and Juro, who are very clearly stronger than everybody on Earth outside of Boruto, retreat? Well, they've paid particular attention to at least Hidari in the last couple of chapters and how confused he is. See, because while Juro seems to understand the objective of the Shinju, that's because he created it. Juro was the person that established in a conversation between all four Shinju that they should consume the people they're most intrigued by. And therefore, Juro, as the leader, is the most set in this ideology. However, Hidari, in a short and heated conversation he had with Sarada, yelled at her as she asked him about how he was able to use the Chidori, saying not only does he not know what the Chidori is, but he's also not sure why he's able to use it. But all that he wants is to get answers about who he is, and he believes he'll get some of those by consuming her. Now, this level of confusion has only ever really been established in Hidari. Even Hidari, in the conversation between the four Shinju about what they were going to do to find an ego, seemed the most confused on picking a target and why they were picking a target in the first place. And thus I would reckon that there's actually an equal amount of possibility that Hidari will retreat after a piece of Sasuke breaks through him and makes him realize that Sarada is his daughter, as there is a possibility that Boruto is the one to retreat using Flying Raijin. However, who retreats isn't all that necessary. All we need to know is that this fight isn't going to be concluded in Chapter 12. What is important, however, is where Boruto would retreat to if he was the one retreating. And mind you, whether or not he's retreating because of the battle against Hidari or retreating because Hidari's retreated and he's not welcome in Konoha, where Boruto would go remains the same. And that is, rather undoubtedly, one of Orochimaru's caves. So if Boruto were hypothetically the person to retreat from this battle against Hidari, he would also hypothetically have Himawari and Sarada in both arms, which means that Boruto would Flying Raijin, Himawari, and Sarada to one of Orochimaru's caves. And not only does this make logical sense, as Boruto's probably the only person who could protect these two people that are being targeted by the Shinju, but it makes even more logical sense when you consider the fact that Boruto, Kashin Koji, and possibly Orochimaru are the only people on Earth who would be able to train Himawari and Sarada to get strong enough to battle against against the Shinju. And thus, if Himawari and Sarada are to become even remotely useful in the power scaling scheme of the Boruto universe, they need to have a big training glow up. And while they've both undoubtedly gotten stronger during the time skip, it was rather promptly shown to them that they're not strong enough. In fact, the only person who is strong enough is Boruto, the person saving them. However, as I've been thinking about this point more, as this was an idea that I had 20 days ago, I've realized that while the possibility of Boruto stealing Sarada back to Orochimaru's caves is high, that the percentages that he also steals Himawari is a bit lower. See, because another important wrinkle that was established in chapter 11 of Boruto is that Kawaki is, apparently rather slowly, flying back to the scene of the battle he had against Hidari and Jura. Now, it's been rather clearly established that the only person that Kawaki seems to care about in Konoha is Himawari. As the second that Kawaki heard that Himawari was in danger from Shikamaru, he kicked it up a gear. And thus in chapter 12, there's a solid possibility that while Boruto is having a quick scuffle with Hidari, that Kawaki has enough time to return to the scene where he got his teeth kicked in by Jura. And since Kawaki is one of the most dedicated people I've ever seen to getting in the way, there's a somewhat fair possibility that he is actually the person who steals Himawari away, making sure that she's safe in the battle against Hidari and Jura. Or that he tells Delta to take her away because after all, she is unconscious. And thus, I genuinely believe it's a coin flip as to whether or not Himawari is going to end up in Konoha or in the Orochimaru caves with Boruto and Sarada. But actually, it's less of a coin flip and more, I genuinely don't believe Himawari is going to leave Konoha. But why? Well, to me, it seems fairly obvious that Himawari's grown some important connections in Konoha from a contextual standpoint. I mean, obviously her brother is outside of Konoha because in the two most recent chapters, it was very clearly established that Himawari has deep ties to Team 10. And with Inogen now having a freshly healed basketball-sized hole in his stomach that may or may not put him in a coma for a couple of months, Himawari seems like a somewhat natural replacement for Inogen on Team 10. And that's corroborated with the fact that it was set up in chapter 11 that Jura would meet Team 10 again. More specifically, that Jura would meet Shikadai again, but that usually implies Team 10. When you tie this into the fact that Jura's target in all of this is Himawari, and the fact that Jura has now established the fact that he will battle against Team 10 again, it seems the most likely to me that Himawari is going to be tied to Team 10 closer than anybody else in Two Blue Vortex, at least until Jura is defeated. And since Team 10 is not going to be tied up in Boruto's flying Raijin, and Team 10 is not going to defect from Konoha, they do believe Boruto is a murderer. If Himawari is to be connected to Team 10, as I believe she's going to be, then she needs to be in Konoha. On top of that, establishing Himawari as a deuteragonist, the second MC, and then connecting her to an existing team of people in Konoha that we know and enjoy is the perfect way, narratively, for Kishimoto to set up a way to tell the story of Konoha while a lot of the main characters are away from Konoha. Because if, hypothetically, Sarada, Mitsuki, and Boruto were all removed from Konoha, the only main characters left in Konoha would be Himawari and Kawaki. And Himawari, until Two Blue Vortex, couldn't even necessarily be considered a main character. And thus, while the development of her character, while really cool, is also done to make sure that we have a continual foothold in Konoha. And thus, if she's removed from Konoha alongside Sarada, the only person left in Konoha is Team 10, who's down in Inogen, and without Himawari, we don't care about all that much, and Kawaki, who, while compelling, is not as compelling as everybody else who's left Konoha. And here's the thing. Himawari could train in the Orochimaru caves with Kashin Koji, Orochimaru, Boruto, Sarada, and possibly Kakashi, but none of those people really have any more knowledge about what's going on with her than anybody in Konoha does. She's the Jinchuriki of Kurama. If anything, there should be scrolls in books about being the Jinchuriki of Kurama in Konoha. But when you consider the fact that Jura actively compared Himawari's current state more to that of the Shinju than of a Jinchuriki, then the only people that could ever possibly train her would be the Shinju, and that's not going to happen. See, because while technically Boruto is still probably the best person to train her as the most informed person on Shinju, it's not so much better that she needs to not be in Konoha. And thus I believe it's much more likely that Sarada ends up in Orochimaru's caves with Boruto than Sarada and Himawari. But if Sarada and Boruto are in one of Orochimaru's many caves, that leaves the door open to the only person they would need left to complete Team 7, Mitsuki. See, because not only if Boruto and Sarada were back together would they be one person short of Team 7, but they'd also be in the cave of the parent of the person they're missing. And thus, if Boruto and Sarada were to be training in Orochimaru's caves, it would only make logical sense that some way, somehow, Mitsuki would join them. See, whether that's Orochimaru, who's most likely either broken out of omnipotence or was convinced that it was fake by Sasuke, reaching out to their child to say, hey, your former teammates are here, you want to come train with them? Or just Mitsuki popping in to see their parent one day and then being like, oh my god, Boruto and Sarada, what are you guys doing here? The likelihood that Boruto and Sarada just happen to be in Orochimaru's caves and Mitsuki doesn't join them at one point seems very slim to me. See, there's two very interesting points that revolve around the reunion of Team 7. There's one, the ideology that people don't believe New Gen Team 7 is as good as the old gen, and two, the fact that the old gen Team 7 was broken up so early in their run that a lot of people feel as though we didn't get enough of their time together. See, because while sending Sasuke outside of the village was a compelling way to turn him into an antagonist and stretch the relationship of him and everybody else in Team 7, and thus in that stretching build out their character development plots, there are those on the internet who would have preferred they had stayed together for the entirety of Naruto's run. And thus, by bringing the New Gen Team 7 back together at the beginning of Part 2 of Boruto, Kishimoto kind of has a way to fix both of those resounding issues. Oh, you think New Gen Team 7 hasn't enough time together and therefore Old Gen clears? Well, here, they're back together. You said you wanted more time to see what the building of bonds would have looked like between Old Gen Team 7 if they had all stayed together for the entirety of the story. Here's Team 7 coming back together halfway through the story. And thus, Kishimoto, like he's done with so many other plot points in Boruto, finds an opportunity to build off what could be identified as flaws in Naruto and Shippuden. And at this point, there's actually no real reason for Team 7 not to be back together. See, think about an old verbiage that we say all the time on this channel. Kishimoto never does anything for nothing. See, Mitsuki being the person to knock out Kawaki and fly to Boruto's location and have a deep conversation with him in the woods where Boruto is sparing him didn't happen for nothing. That could have been a battle between Boruto and Kawaki or Konohamaru and Boruto. It could have been a lot of people who genuinely believe that Boruto is a murderer. And yet, one of the first things that Kishimoto established in Two Blue Vortex was that Mitsuki's ideology that Kawaki is his son was beginning to waver. And not only that, but also the idea that Kawaki may even need a son is beginning to waver. But the second half of that development only happened because Boruto told Mitsuki, you don't need a son, go find your own path. On top of that, Boruto showing Mitsuki mercy in their battle established to Mitsuki that Boruto might have been his son, that Mitsuki's memories might be scrambled, and that Boruto may not be the murderous monster that he remembers. Now, ironically, if I was Mitsuki in this situation, I would probably go to my mastermind scientist of a parent to try and figure out what's going on with my brain, which could serve as a golden opportunity for Mitsuki to re-enter the fray of Team 7. As for why Boruto and Sarada would team up, that seems fairly obvious. So far as it stands right now, there's no real reason for Sarada to be in Konoha. She's not training, Sasuke's not there. Shikamaru, while on her side now, has the ability to communicate discreetly through the medium of Ino with Boruto, and therefore she's not necessarily needed in Konoha as a spy. I mean, Boruto's got the Hokage. Tie that into the fact that Sumire, a non-combatant, is going to be serving under Amado and therefore can feed Boruto information about what Amado is up to, and the possibility that Sumire could pass messages along to Boruto because they're both able to summon Nue, and Sarada genuinely kind of serves no purpose in Konoha, especially at her current power level. And thus the best path for Sarada to become a more relevant Sasuke-esque character for the Two Blue Vortex universe is for her to join the fold of the story with Boruto, somebody she actively aligns herself with anyways. And since she's as Team Sasuke as Kashin Koji or Boruto, it would make sense that she would join up. And here's the thing, if Orochimaru or Mitsuki of his own volition decides to join up with Team 7, this would be a direct parallel to the beginning of Part 2 of Naruto, a time when post-time skip, after all training with their respective legendary Sannin, Team 7 moved forward with the legendary Sannin as allies.
But Nick, that would mean that Sarada would technically have to train under Tsunade or something like that.
Because in this scenario, obviously Boruto is training with Kashin Koji, Mitsuki would be training with Orochimaru, and that would leave Sarada with no one. Right? Well, no, not necessarily. See, it's ever been odd to me since the beginning of Two Blue Vortex that Shikamaru was the person selected to be 8th Hokage. Even if he believes he's just holding on to the hat for a little while until Naruto comes back, in the face of a Hokage disappearance or even a death, usually a Hokage who served in the past steps up, like Hiruzen did for Minato. However, Kakashi didn't even seem to be considered. In fact, Kakashi hasn't been seen since the beginning of Two Blue Vortex. But here's the thing, what we do currently know about Kakashi is that he's as active on missions as he's ever been. Between Kakashi Retsudan, which is all about post-Kage Kakashi going out and doing crazy high-level missions, and the Steam Ninja Scrolls, we've been given 2 separate light novels about Kakashi going out and being the village's forefront ninja, and thus the possibility that Kakashi would be sent out to track Sasuke, a now rogue ninja of Konoha, seems fairly high when you consider the fact that he's one of the greatest trackers that the village has to offer, and the fact that he has very close and personal ties to Sasuke and Boruto. Tie that into the fact that Kakashi is basically the only person on Earth who could train Sarada in how to use the Sharingan and the MS, and it seems fairly obvious that Kakashi will re-enter the fray in a teaching capacity. And if you want the real cherry on top of that argument, there's also the fact that Kakashi is the only person inside of Konoha that knows Kashin Koji exists, as it was Kakashi who stopped Kashin Koji when he invaded the village. On top of this, Sarada's not a healer, and thus her training under Tsunade wouldn't make any sense. It would make more sense that she would train under a fighter, especially after the most recent chapter. See, one of the biggest talking points in chapter 11 was the fact that Hidari was able to use the Chidori, something that Sarada inherently ties to Sasuke and the Sharingan. However, even if we ignore the fact that Boruto is now displayed in 2 Blue Vortex that he knows how to use Purple Lightning, Kakashi's move, because after all, it was one of his listed abilities in the first data book of Boruto, and therefore there's a possibility he learned it before the time skip. With so many talking points revolving around the usage of the Chidori, it would make sense if the creator of Chidori was brought in as a teacher role to Sarada. And who was the creator of the Chidori, chat? Kakashi. On top of this, if we are trying to draw some lines between Sarada and her father in terms of plot development, her being trained by Kakashi would be a fantastic way to do that. See, because the reason that Kakashi told Sasuke that he'd be the person to track him down personally if Sasuke ever left the village again is because Kakashi identifies Sasuke leaving the village as one of his biggest failures in life. And thus, if you gave Kakashi the opportunity to train Sasuke's daughter and make sure that she doesn't stray from the path of good, I can't imagine Kakashi shying away from that opportunity.
But Nick, shouldn't Kakashi be affected by omnipotence?
I mean, yeah, probably, but it was Naruto in the early part of Shippuden that said that Kakashi was smarter than Shikamaru. On top of that, Kakashi is, if nothing else, a man of reason who would probably want to believe the story that Sasuke was telling him. And thus, if in the first year of the time skip, Kakashi was able to find Sasuke and Boruto, he probably would have heard Sasuke out. However, if it took him 2 or 3 years, he probably would have heard Kashin Koji out. And thus, somewhat similarly to the old Gen Team 7, Sarada would be training under Kakashi, Mitsuki would be training under Orochimaru, and Boruto would be training under Kashin Koji, or Jiraiya. And if this were to be the layout, it would create incredibly interesting dynamics. See, because while Kakashi and Jiraiya were never necessarily close, Kakashi did still hold a great amount of respect in his heart for Jiraiya, as after all, it was Jiraiya who trained his master, Minato. However, the substantially more interesting and more compelling storyline here is the possible connection between Orochimaru and Kashin Koji. See, Orochimaru is a reformed person. They work for the side of good in Konoha as they try to discover all the secrets of ninjutsu, genjutsu, and science. And there's been a lot of scientific breakthroughs for Orochimaru, who's effectively mastered cloning, which is why Log and Mitsuki exist. And thus, not only is there intrigue in Orochimaru interacting with a clone created by Amado, but there's also the fact that that clone is a clone of Orochimaru's best friend. See, while it certainly gets less shine than Naruto and Sasuke's friendship, Jiraiya and Orochimaru undoubtedly held love for each other. However, the way they went about their tearing apart was much more aggressive than that of Naruto and Sasuke. And thus Orochimaru, as a reformed person, re-establishing a bond with Kashin Koji, the clone of his best childhood friend, would be really cool to see. On top of this, Mitsuki taking this opportunity to possibly step away from Konoha and go spend some time with his parent and the breaking of his son ideology lends to some possible massive character development. See, in the face of an identity crisis, Mitsuki returning to Orochimaru and trying to figure out what motivates Orochimaru, the person who's closest to him on Earth, makes sense. However, when Mitsuki makes this journey, he'll once again be faced with Boruto, who will once again probably tell Mitsuki that he should try and blaze his own path, or which will lead Mitsuki to either keeping Boruto as his son or genuinely trying to find something else to motivate him. And I believe that something else to motivate him could be becoming strong enough to fight alongside his team. Which makes even more sense when you consider the fact that Mitsuki has become incredibly shooken in the idea that Kawaki could be his son. And Kawaki is now antagonist number 1 outside of Jura and Hidari for Team 7. And thus from a plot perspective, the reunion of Team 7 just makes the most sense, as them continuing their individual storylines disjointed from each other it seems to muddy the waters of the story. Trying to keep up with Himawari, Team 10, Sarada, Mitsuki, and Boruto all separately would be too difficult. That's like Game of Thrones levels of splitting of the story. But if you can place Boruto's struggle to save the world from omnipotence right alongside Mitsuki's identity crisis and Sarada's goal to get her father back, all in one neat little package, it makes the storytelling much simpler and much easier to digest. And thus, yes, I believe in Chapter 12, we will either see the foundations of Team 7 coming back together, or just the straight up reunion. But what do you guys believe is going to happen in this incredibly important chapter? Tell me in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Man, I feel like these months are flying by.